Hi guys, welcome to my living room. I am here to read you the story of The Frog Band and the Mystery of Lion Castle by Jim Smith. And I'm going to stop during this story, and I might zoom in on some words, I might zoom in on some pictures, ask you some questions. If I ask you a question, I want you to just answer it out loud. Even if you're by yourself, you can just answer it out loud to an empty room, okay? Heave, 1, 2, 3, chanted the Frog Band as they pushed their broken down lorry over the drawbridge of Lion Castle one New Year's Eve, scattering mud and leaves everywhere. A lorry is another word for a truck in the United Kingdom. So in Scotland and Ireland and England, they call trucks lorries. What's a drawbridge? Drawbridge of a castle. If you know what a drawbridge is, I want you to say it out loud. Okay, good job. Oh no, gasped Mrs. MacOtter. I just this minute cleaned there. Johann S. Frog raised his hat politely and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, we're the famous Frog Band, and as you can see, we're looking for help." The clatter on the drawbridge attracted the elderly owner of the castle, who leisurely emerged from a doorway. Wow, lots of good words in that. So clatter, which is right up here, is like a bunch of noise, like a bunch of loud noise, right? So if people were dropping things outside on the driveway or something, you would hear it and you'd go, gosh, what's that clatter? Elderly means someone who is old. Leisurely emerge from a doorway. That means you come out, you're not in a hurry at all. If you're leisurely walking, you're just kind of like slowly moving along. Hello, chaps. Having a spot of bother? Brook or Lion at your service. So again, a spot of bother means like, are you in trouble? Are you in a little bit of trouble? Johann introduced himself and his band.
Mommy, more French fries.
Sorry, Liam is yelling in the background. Go ask Gavin, okay?
I'm getting something by myself.
Okay. Liam is looking for French fries. Sorry, guys. I'm going to start over. Johann introduced himself and his band and asked if they might borrow a toolkit. Brooker was only too delighted to help, and as Godfrey disappeared under the lorry, he invited the other frogs to see inside the castle. This book and other books by this author have really detailed, beautiful illustrations that are really interesting to look at. First, he took them to his laboratory, which was his pride and joy. Johann was very impressed by a strange cabinet with many knobs and switches. "That is my wireless set," announced Brooker proudly. "I can receive messages from all over the world." All the frogs were greatly mystified by the crackling sounds coming from it. So a wireless set, I'm going to move this picture over so you can see it. This was a long enough time ago where you couldn't, obviously you couldn't get on a computer and the internet and maybe the radio. So a wireless set is an old piece of technology. It looks pretty complicated. If you look at all those wires and switches and knobs, I definitely wouldn't know how to work one. Meanwhile, which means like at the same time, high above the castle, another frog was also mystified. What does mystified mean? Think about that word mystified. It reminds me of mystery, right? Something that we don't know about, we don't have the answer for. So if you're mystified by something, it means you don't understand what's going on. Alphonse Le Flic, eminent detective. What's a detective? detective is it's like a special type of police person. Alphonse Leflic, eminent detective, was in his gas balloon, and he was lost. He was on his way to an international conference of sleuths, but he had been blown off course. He was already late, but now he feared he would have to miss it altogether. Leaning over the edge of the basket, he emptied some sand ballast. So this is a hot air balloon. That's what he's in. And so there's these bags of sand that you can empty to change the weight of the balloon. Suddenly, he was thrown into a corner of the basket and showered with maps, compasses, and cameras as the basket swung crazily beneath the balloon. The air was filled with a loud tearing sound and a violent hissing. So a violent hissing. Imagine that in your mind. If you heard something like a huge balloon and there was a hole ripped in it and it would go tss, but even louder. Staggering to his feet, Alphonse realized that the balloon had been caught by a high wire aerial mast on one of the turrets of the castle below. So when you look at a castle, see these little kind of high pokey points? Those are called turrets. So there's this wire thing sticking up here, and it ripped a big hole in his balloon. Slowly, the balloon sank to the ground as the gas escaped through the large hole. Alphonse looked for his repair kit, but it was too late. "Catch this rope and guide me down," he yelled to the group of frogs who were standing gaping in the castle courtyard. Gaping is like if you're staring at something and you're staring sort of almost in surprise or shock with your mouth hanging open. Safely on the ground, Alphonse greeted his old friends, the frog band, with delight and explained his problem to their host. "No trouble, my boy," said Brooker sympathetically. "I can soon make you some more gas, but not tonight. It's getting late." That night, as they sat around the log fire in the great hall, Brooker Lion told his guests of his ancestor, Clarence de Lyon, who had disappeared from his study on New Year's Eve many years ago when the castle had been under siege from his enemies. So a siege, especially in a castle, would be like if a huge group of people came to attack it. Ever since then, it was said that his ghost walked the castle every New Year's Eve, and no villager would go near the castle at that time. So big houses like castles or like a big manor house usually has a village that's not exactly attached to it, but kind of. So it's a village nearby. And so all of the people who live in this small village, which is like a small town, don't go near the castle on New Year's Eve. Like you can see all the detail in these pictures. I think that would be kind of a cool place to sleep. Would you sleep there? Yes or no way? I want you to answer. You could tell somebody who's around you, or you could just say it to yourself. Right? This guy gets like the fancy room over here. And they all sleep over here in the tower. The next morning dawned bright and very cold. The surrounding countryside was white with frost, and the moat was covered with a solid sheet of ice, inches thick. So that's pretty impressive. Like inches thick of ice would be like this. That much ice that you're standing on, that's a lot of ice. While Godfrey Frog donned his overalls and started work on the lorry's engine once again, Brooker Lion set up his equipment to produce the gas for Alphonse's balloon. Donned his overalls. What do you think that means? Godfrey Frog donned his overalls. Donned is a sort of old-fashioned word. It means he put them on, right? He put on his overalls to work on the truck. Finding himself with nothing to do, Shorty Frog wandered off on his own to explore the castle's dungeon. To his disappointment, he found it had been used as a storeroom and was now full of unwanted bits and pieces piled up over the years. What is a dungeon? I feel like we've heard that word before, but we might not know what it means. A dungeon. It's almost like a jail inside of a castle. It's where they would put people who had done something wrong or people that they thought had done something wrong. Never mind, Shorty said to himself. Perhaps I'll find something of old Clarence de Leon. And he began to sift through the junk. Sift through the junk means like to pick something up and move it over here and to look here, and kind of you're moving things around to try to get at what's at the bottom. Right at the back of the old dungeon, Shorty came across a rusty lever set in the stone wall. Curiosity overcame him, and although he knew he shouldn't meddle, he pulled it down. Metal, this word, it's similar to the word metal, right? Like, I'm looking to see if there's something. This little stand is made of metal that my phone is on. This is metal, which means to get involved with something that you should not, right? Like, he really shouldn't be pulling that lever because he doesn't know what it does, but he's so curious, he does it anyway. Okay, I want you to make a prediction. Do you think something good is going to happen or something bad? And I want you to tell somebody or just tell the room. Do you think something good is going to happen or something bad? Okay, let's find out. Immediately, the underground room echoed with a fearsome grinding noise, which ended in a long, loud gurgle. So a fearsome grinding, right? That makes me think of gears moving past each other. A gurgle, that's kind of the sound that water makes, right? If it's going down a drain. Shorty was terrified. He dived beneath an old sofa and pulled a dust sheet over his ears. So a dust sheet, it's another kind of old-fashioned thing that we wouldn't really do here. So if you had a big giant castle or a big giant country house and you were going to leave that house and maybe go live in the city for a while and then you would come back to your house, you would cover things or things in an attic or a dungeon or a storeroom in these big giant white sheets called dust sheets, so that all of your belongings and all of your furniture wouldn't be covered with dust when you came back. In the meantime, up in the courtyard, the balloon had been refilled and was straining at its tethering ropes. Alphonse was delighted with the results and offered to take Brooker up for a ride in the balloon before he set off for his conference. So if it's straining at the tethering ropes, that means it's so full of gas it's ready to take off and go into the air, so the ropes are holding it down. Warmly wrapped up in an enormous overcoat, which is like a big jacket, Brooker Lion heaved himself into the basket, which tells me it's kind of hard for him to get in, right? They've got a box and a chair and somebody helping him. Godfrey Frog, who had just finished tinkering with the lorry. Tinkering is like working on something, maybe a lot, right? If you're tinkering, you're kind of figuring out what's going on. Had come across an old gun in a corner, and now he dragged it onto the drawbridge in order to fire a salute as the balloon ascended. Ascended means to go up. Philip, the cornet player, caught the festive mood and climbed to the battlements, ready to blow a fanfare. Lots of vocabulary words in this book. So battlements is like right up here is these little stairs to where you would go to the top of the castle if the castle was under siege, right? Because that's how you would defend it. You would have people up there shooting arrows or doing whatever people do to defend castles. As Alphonse and Brooker slowly rose out of the courtyard, Godfrey Frog put a match to the gun fuse, and up above, Philip lifted the cornet to his lips, kind of like a trumpet. With a sickening thud, the grapnel caught Philip from behind, and he dropped his cornet right down into the upturned muzzle of Godfrey's gun. So look, here's this gun. It's kind of like a, we might call it a cannon. And look, there's his cornet falling in. And this is kind of something unusual. A grapnel is this piece of metal with all of these kind of like pokey hands on it almost. And it's meant to catch a hold of something. Not him, but... There was a red flash and a huge cloud of smoke as the cornet was shot clean through the balloon. So if something is shot clean through something, it means it goes all the way in and all the way out the other side. Crash! The basket plummeted downwards, smashed through the thick ice, and disappeared from view. "Save them! They'll be drowned!" cried Johann, trying to make himself heard above the clamor and confusion of the courtyard. So again, clamor, lots of noise, lots of movement, maybe people yelling, running around. Now, wait a minute. We might know something about the ice and the moat. Let's go back just a little bit. Look carefully at that picture. He pulled that lever and he heard a gurgling sound. Look very carefully. What do you think has happened to the water in the moat? Do you think it's there or it's gone? If you think it's there, I want you to touch your nose. If you think the water is gone, I want you to touch your head. However, underneath the ice, Brooker Lion and Alphonse Le Flic were still in the basket, swinging wildly, right, back and forth. The moat was waterless. Unknown to everyone, Shorty Frog's mysterious grinding lever had emptied the moat. So all the water's gone. There's still ice on the top, but it's empty. "Don't panic," ordered Alphonse as he produced his magnifying glass and a torch, which is a word that they use in England for a flashlight. "I'm going to investigate the situation." He climbed out of the basket onto the slimy floor of the moat. Creeping forward, he peered into the gloom. So the word gloom is used to describe kind of like a darkness where you don't know what's in the moat and you can't really see. "It's all clear," he called back to Brooker. "You can come down." Down in the dungeon, Shorty Frog had been amusing himself with an old phonograph he found behind the sofa. With only one cylinder to play, he soon became bored and thought he should go back to the others. So look at this. This is a very old method of playing music. So there were these like metal cylinders that you would put into it and it would turn and then the sound would come out of here. Halfway upstairs, he worried about the lever, which was still in the wrong position. "I'd better put it back to where it was," he muttered reluctantly, which means he doesn't really want to do it. As soon as he did so, he heard a distant rumbling sound that was getting closer every minute. So if he pulled the lever down and it emptied the moat, when he pushes the lever back up, do you think that the water will come back or not? Alphonse was bravely peering in every shadow. Peering is like a little tiny look, right? Like you could peer out of a window if you pop your head up and kind of look out. When he too heard the rumble, nearer it came and louder and louder. The water, he yelled. It's coming back. Run! And the two ran as fast as they could to find some way out of the moat before the oncoming rush of water. Because what's above them? Ice, right? If the ice wasn't there, the water might come through and they could kind of follow it and float up with the water as it filled the moat. But because the ice is there, they're trapped. Just as Alphonse was beginning to think this was the end of a very promising career, he spied a doorway. Gasping for breath, he pulled Brooker through. So look, in the moat, there's like this little doorway. Ooh, what do you see? I see some stuff. The steep stairs behind the door led Alphonse and Brooker up and up until they came to a blank wall. There must be a secret panel, breathed Alphonse as he frantically tapped the wall to find the spring that would release the hidden door. Frantic is like you're doing something in a hurry because you're nervous or you're scared or you're worried. Oh, hurry, panicked the old lion. Unaffected by all the excitement, Mrs. McOtter was cleaning the study. She was interrupted by a scratching noise coming from behind the wall. The ghost, she thought in horror, and quickly reassured herself, but surely not in daylight. Then she froze as the portrait of Clarence de Lyon slowly creaked open and two very muddy creatures tumbled out onto her polished floor. Brooker Lion looked puzzled for a while. Then he shouted, "Well done, Alphonse! You've solved the mystery of Lion Castle. Don't you see, my boy," he carried on, "the castle can't be haunted after all." Okay, now I want you to think. Think back to the story he told about Clarence de Lyon. The castle was under siege from his enemies, which means they were attacking the castle. So people say that he just disappeared and vanished. But what do you think actually happened? How would he have escaped? Think about where they just were. He used, old Clarence didn't vanish into thin air all those years ago. He used the passage and escaped across the moat. The following summer, the Frog Band held a series of concerts in the courtyard, and Alphonse returned to give joyrides in his balloon. As Brooker Lion greeted yet another of the tourists who flocked to the castle, now that the rumor of the ghost had been lifted, he jingled his money pocket and blessed the day when chance had led Alphonse Le Flic, eminent detective, and the famous Frog Band to Lion Castle. Lots of good vocabulary in here too. Joy rides are when you are just going somewhere for fun, right? You're not trying to get from one place to another necessarily. It's just for fun. Flocked means lots of people coming at once, right? So the tourists are flocking to the castle. Let's see. I thought there was one more. Rumor. The rumor of the ghost had been lifted. So a rumor is things that people say that maybe there's a little bit of truth to the story, but people aren't exactly sure. It's like telling people information that you're not sure about and then passing it on to other people. So this book was one of my absolute favorites when I was little. My mom would read it to me. I'm going to look and see when this book was published. 1978. So before I was born in 1981. So let's count up from that. So 78, 79, 80, 81. So this book was written and published, I should say, 3 years before I was born. So I loved hearing this story. And I actually have another Frog Band book that I'm going to read next week by the same author, Jim Smith. All right, you guys, that was a long one. I hope you enjoyed the story. Bye.